I love power carving. I'm still not what you'd consider good at it, but I thoroughly enjoy the process. It gives me a similar feeling to turning, except I'm able to do things that aren't just round. And it might surprise you, but it's a heck of a lot cheaper to get started with power carving than it is with turning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is Arbortek's Mini Carver, which is their latest evolution of the mini grinder. I'm going to spoil the surprise and declare, in an absolute sea of power carving tools available these days, the Mini Carver stands out to me as the best all-in-one start-to-finish tool for beginners. But unlike most beginners' tools, this isn't something you grow out of and replace, but rather something you complement with other tools down the track. At 295 Australian dollary dues, it might sound like a steep entry point, but that's less than the cost of a lathe, and that's before you add on the cost of a grinder, turning tools, a chuck, and so on. So what is it? Well, in the box is a carry bag. It's not a bad carry case, and sure, I prefer a Systainer or L box with custom foam inserts for all the cutters, but I also don't want the tool to cost another $100 just so I can get a nicer case for it. The bag is fine, and it's much better than most of the cheap blow molded tool cases. It lets me take the tool and accessories outside easily. I just need a little plastic container with dividers to protect the various accessories. Inside the bag you get the Mini Carver and a stack of accessories. I want to talk about those first. An upgrade from the previous mini grinder, you get the Mini Industrial Blade Standard. This thing is a beast, comparatively. Even though it has a slightly wider kerf than the old mini grinder blade, being carbide, it stays sharper for longer and hogs out more material more easily. And since they're flat teeth instead of curved hooks, they can be sharpened with a diamond file much easier. The Mini Industrial Blade isn't new, that's been around for at least 10 years as an optional accessory, and I even bought one for my own mini grinder a few months back. It is, however, really nice that this has become the new standard blade. And just like the new blade, there are new types of sanding discs. The mini grinder sanding discs had this weird plastic backer on them. It's quite rigid, and the sandpaper is glued to that. The rigidity made it more like a cutting disc than a sanding disc, and it made it kind of expensive to get more sanding discs because you were paying for the disposable plastic backer. I suppose the counter to this is that the mini grinder wasn't great for sanding. I've never actually used up a single sanding disc, so I've never needed a replacement. A fixed speed grinder just tended to burn rather than sand. The new discs, however, use the same flexible rubber backing pad that Arbortek's Contour Sander uses. This won't give you the random orbit sander action, but the sandpaper will follow the contours a lot better rather than just reshaping them. And thanks to one of the new features of the Mini Carver itself, you can actually sand without burning, but I'll get to that in a bit. Alright, the Mini Carver itself, what's new? 3 things: ergonomics, variable speed, and the one everyone is going to pay attention to, dust collection. Let's start there with dust collection. Actually, no, first I want to talk about 3 gripes I have with the machine. Unfortunately, the blade change mechanism is still exactly the same. You need to use both an Allen key and a flathead screwdriver to lock the spindle in place to loosen or tighten the bolt onto the machine. It sucks. It's not the end of the world, but I'll admit I've overused a particular cutter when I should have switched because I didn't want to have to go through that. The second issue is the power plug. It has a tendency to pull out of an extension lead with just a little pressure. The original also suffered from this. It's as if the plug is just a hair thinner on the pins than other tools. It's not the end of the world, I get that. It's just annoying because you have to be a little bit more careful with the cable. I know I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but the third gripe I have is backwards compatibility. The Mini Carver uses the same 3/8 inch mount as the mini grinder, but it's slightly smaller. This accommodates the Mini Industrial blade without the brass spacer it had to have before, but it means the old blade doesn't fit because the locking screw bottoms out on the mount rather than the blade. If you have one of those spacers, however, you can use that with the old blade. It just would have been nice if that was included. Okay, dust collection. I'm going to backtrack a little bit first. There is no stage of power carving that is particularly clean. The larger the tool, the more dust per minute it can produce. If you use a rotary tool like a Dremel or Fortum, you may have encountered downdraft tables for those tools. These work remarkably well, but you have to remember most carvings on those type of tools are on the smaller side, or usually just detail work for a larger piece. And the Fortum packs a whopping 1.6 horse motor. There is really only so much dust that they can actually produce. Enter Arbortek's Mini Carver Dust Collection. It's this toolless removable plastic shroud that clips onto the bottom of the tool, and the shop vac goes in the other end. It's a little fiddly to attach and remove, but it's really not the end of the world. When we look at it next to the mini grinder, you can see that the guard has been redesigned to capture as much dust as possible while not getting in too much of your way. Arbortek say it's for collecting dust when sanding, and when sanding it actually does a pretty good job of dust collection. Okay, we're not talking Festool level dust collection, but it's getting decent collection when sanding. This type of dust is the worst for your health, and it does tend to make the worst mess because it clings to all surfaces. When carving, the results aren't as great, perhaps picking up half the chips. Now don't get me wrong, half collected means cleanup time is halved, but it still litters the workshop and I'll likely still end up carving outside. I did find, however, this varies a great deal depending on what blade you've got on. The included mini industrial blade and the old style blades were probably the worst for dust collection, while I found the mini turbo and the King Arthur Tools carbide burr were the best. Could it be better? Maybe. But also maybe not. The bottom line is it's a compromise either way. Better dust collection can only be achieved with a bigger shroud that encompasses more of the cutter, which ultimately means you've got fewer degrees of movement and shallower depth of cut. That's not really a situation anybody wants. Bottom line is that this doesn't make it an inside the workshop carving tool, but you can actually sand inside the workshop. Next up is improved ergonomics. The obvious improvement is the anti-vibration handle, and it does what it says on the box. No perceivable vibration gets through the handle, so I don't feel the need to wear gloves for that purpose. Switching back and forth between the mini grinder and the mini carver, the difference in vibration levels was obvious in just a few minutes. The mini grinder had me wanting gloves in about 2 minutes, and the mini carver, I lost track of time because I couldn't feel the vibrations at all. It should be noted that the handle uses a different thread than on the mini grinder, so you can't just get the new part and stick it on the old tool. The body of the grinder is slightly larger diameter. It made no real difference to me either way in grip comfort, but it could pose a problem for those with smaller hands that found the mini grinder are already a little bit on the larger side. Finally, on ergonomics, the new motor is considerably quiet. Both no load and cutting sounds are quieter. The old motor had a much more piercing pitch, so this is a welcome improvement for me because it makes carving considerably less fatiguing. You should still wear hearing protection, it's just much more pleasant. The standout feature to me though is the variable speed. On paper it might not seem like all that big of a deal. More power and more rippings is more better, right? When combined with the new flexible sanding backing pads, suddenly the mini carver can do sanding while the mini grinder just burnt the wood. With the mini carver set to the slower speed, it does a great job of sanding. But pick it up to 2 or 3 and with a coarse grit sandpaper, you can do a lot of smoothing out of curves and tool mark removal with the sanding discs. I'd recommend using 80 grit or coarser for those tasks. 4 or 5 on the speed dial seems to work best with carbide burrs, while max speed suits the industrial carving blade. Variable speed was the last major feature the competition, primarily the Merlin 2 from King Arthur, had over the mini grinder. You could argue that the Merlin 2 still wins in the weight department at a featherlight 550 grams. It's 7 times lighter, but the mini carver has 7.5 times more power. Bottom line, who is this for? If you're just starting out and are interested in power carving, the mini carver is a no-brainer. It's more or less self-contained in that a project can be done from start to finish with just this power carving tool. Larger tools like the turbo plane can also seem much scarier for beginners too. Even if they're safe, a 4-inch disc on a regular grinder is scarier than a 2-inch disc that has the blade further away from the handle. If I had to recommend one tool to get started, it'd be this. It's the perfect starter tool and it doesn't get any less useful as you start branching out with more tools. If you already have a mini grinder, it's a bit of a harder sell. The mini carver is a better tool, but it is evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Don't get me wrong, they're all very welcome features and it's a much more pleasant experience, But ultimately, it doesn't stop a functioning mini grinder from achieving similar results. If you have a mini grinder and you're looking at buying a carbide burr for the mini grinder, the variable speed mini carver with coarse sandpaper actually works better. If you have a mini grinder and we're looking at buying a pair of anti-vibration gloves, with this tool you actually don't need them. Eventually these little things might start to add up, but that's going to have to be your call. A big thanks to Arbortech for supplying the tool for review. The mini carver is now available in Australia and should be available in the US shortly. And finally, a big thanks to you for watching.